And yet, Meghan's shadow wasn't just about rejection. It was about fear. Fear that her influence would outshine the monarchy's. Fear that she would become, in death or in scandal, another Diana. Fear that history was repeating itself, and Charles was powerless to stop it. The irony is almost unbearable. Charles, who once loved a woman the crown deemed unacceptable, now accusing his son of making the same mistake. But here's the cruelest part. Charles didn't stop there. After pointing out Meghan's shadow, he made it clear that this wasn't just idle concern. He had a condition that would tear open wounds too deep to ignore. Because the king wasn't offering unconditional love. He was offering a deal that put Harry's marriage on the chopping block. And that condition, sharp, shocking, and unforgivable, was about to land like a dagger in Harry's chest. Imagine being told that the very thing you've been yearning for, the belonging, the recognition, the place within your own bloodline, was suddenly within reach again. After years of exile, criticism, and icy silences, Harry sat across from his father and heard words that could change everything. There could be a role for you still, a place within the monarchy. Can you picture the flood of emotions that must have hit him in that instant? Surprise, hope, maybe even a flash of relief. Because let's face it, for all the talk of independence, for all the proclamations that he and Meghan were happier away from royal duties, Harry has always seemed like a man caught between worlds. The life he left behind still haunts him. The titles, the uniforms, the legacy, it's in his blood. And suddenly, here was his father, the king himself, dangling it in front of him again. But before we dig into Harry's reaction, let's step back and ask, why now? Why would Charles, after years of rift and resentment, offer Harry a role again? The answer lies in the fragile state of the monarchy itself. With Charles's reign still young and William's destiny looming, the family cannot afford endless fractures. The scandals of the past decade have taken their toll. Public trust has wavered. The monarchy has become, in many eyes, less a symbol of stability and more a soap opera of dysfunction. Charles knows this. He feels it pressing down on his crown. And he sees in Harry not just a son, but a tool, a chance to restore some semblance of unity, if only appearances. Here's where it gets emotional. Harry has always craved purpose. Even in California, surrounded by luxury and celebrity friends, his projects and public statements reveal a man who still longs for structure, for mission, for the validation that comes with duty. His military service once gave him that. Royal life, for all its restrictions, gave him that. And here was his father hinting that it wasn't too late, that the door wasn't completely shut. But let's not romanticize it. Charles's offer wasn't born solely of love. It was strategic, a calculated move in a chess game that has been playing out for decades. The monarchy thrives on unity, on image, on the illusion of family strength. To have Harry back, even symbolically, would be a win. A win against the critics, against the media narratives of irreparable fracture, against history's judgment. And yet, the offer was more than just strategy. Beneath the calculation, there was something else. A flicker of vulnerability in Charles's voice. Because for all his faults, for all his coldness, Charles is still a father. And fathers, even kings, want their sons close. Do you see the contradiction? The king needed Harry for the monarchy, but the father needed Harry for himself. Now, imagine being Harry in that moment. Your father, who for years seemed unreachable, finally offering you a chance to return. Would you leap at it? Would you embrace him? Or would you wait, suspicious, wondering what strings were attached? Harry's silence stretched long enough to make the air in the room feel heavy. He knew there had to be a catch, because nothing in that family comes without conditions. The monarchy doesn't hand out forgiveness freely. It demands loyalty, sacrifice, obedience. And sure enough, Charles's next words would prove Harry right. Because while the offer sounded like an olive branch, it was really a test. A test of loyalty, a test of love, a test of whether Harry was willing to sever the bond that had defined his new life. Harry, Charles said carefully, this role, this future, it's possible. But not as things are now. The words landed like thunder. A promise wrapped in a threat. A doorway opened but half blocked. And Harry knew, in that moment, that the price of the offer wasn't measured in service or duty. It was measured in love. Because the catch, sharp, shocking, and inevitable, was Meghan. But how Charles phrased that condition, and how Harry reacted, would turn this fragile reunion into an ultimatum that could fracture the monarchy forever. One sentence. That's all it took to shatter the fragile hope that had flickered in Clarence's house. Charles leaned forward, his voice low but steady, and delivered the line that would slice through Harry like a blade. There is a place for you here, but not with her. Can you imagine the silence that followed? The weight of it pressing down on Harry's chest? His heart pounding in disbelief, his jaw tightening as the words sank in? For a moment, he must have wondered if he'd misheard, if his father, the man who once fought for his own forbidden love, had truly given him an ultimatum so cruel, so impossible. Let's pause and really think about this. Charles wasn't just questioning Meghan's role in the monarchy. He was questioning Harry's marriage, his vows, his very identity as a husband and father. This wasn't about titles or duties anymore. This was about love. The love Harry swore to protect when he stood at the altar and said, "I do." And now, his own father was demanding that he break it. Why would Charles take it this far? Why make such a brutal condition? Here's the harsh reality. To Charles, Meghan isn't just a family member. She's a threat, a lightning rod for scandal, a constant reminder of the fractures in the monarchy. Every interview she gives, every headline she makes, drags the royal family back into the mud. And Charles, already fighting for his own fragile legitimacy as king, sees her as the barrier that keeps Harry from returning, the wall between father and son, the shadow that won't lift. But here's the cruel irony. Charles knows exactly what it feels like to be told your love is unacceptable. He lived it. He endured it. His love for Camilla was once treated as poison to the crown. He was forced into a marriage with Diana that broke her heart, and eventually his. He spent decades waiting, sacrificing, bending to duty, before finally being allowed to have the woman he loved by his side. You'd think that history would have softened him. You'd think that pain would have made him more compassionate. And yet, here he was, passing the same curse down to his son. Harry's face must have burned with rage and disbelief. How could his father, who once pleaded for understanding for Camilla, demand that he abandon Meghan? How could the man who preached duty to family now insist that Harry betray the very vow that made him a husband? The hypocrisy was unbearable. And let's not forget the stakes. Meghan isn't just Harry's wife. She's the mother of his children, Archie and Lilibet. Can you even fathom what it would mean for Harry to accept his father's condition? It wouldn't just mean divorcing Meghan. It would mean tearing his children from their mother, shattering their family, repeating the very cycle of pain that destroyed Harry's childhood after Diana and Charles's divorce. It would mean becoming the very thing Harry swore he would never be. Let me ask you directly. If you were in Harry's shoes, what would you do? Would you choose your father, the monarchy, the titles, the legacy? Or would you stand by your wife and children, even if it meant permanent exile? There is no easy answer. And that's what makes this moment so devastating. Charles, in that instant, wasn't just a king protecting his crown. He was a father testing his son's soul. And Harry, caught between love and legacy, could feel the walls closing in. The silence stretched. Harry's lips parted as though he might speak, but no words came. His silence was louder than any argument. It told Charles everything, that Harry would not, could not, accept such a condition. That his love for Meghan was stronger than any title, any throne, any role his father could offer. But Charles didn't relent. His eyes hardened, his voice firm. You cannot have both. And with that, the fragile thread holding this reunion together snapped. The olive branch became a dagger. The promise became a threat. And Harry was left staring at the man who should have protected him, realizing instead that he had been cornered. What happens when a son refuses a king? What happens when a husband refuses his father? That's where this story takes its darkest turn. Because Harry's silence wasn't just an answer. It was the beginning of a storm neither man could control. Duty or love? Tradition or loyalty? The question hung in the air at Clarence's house like a sword suspended by a thread. Harry sat frozen, his father's words echoing in his mind. There is a place for you here, but not with her. The ultimatum was clear, and yet the answer was anything but. This was more than a choice. It was a dilemma that tore him in two. Harry's dilemma wasn't just personal. It was generational. It was historical. It was a collision between everything he'd been raised to believe and everything he had fought to protect, since leaving royal life. On one side of the scale was the monarchy, the legacy, the chance to return to the fold and reclaim his identity as a prince of the realm. On the other side was Meghan, his wife, his partner, the woman he promised to cherish above all else. Which side would weigh heavier? Which vow was stronger? The one he was born into, or the one he made before God? Let's dig into Harry's heart at that moment. He must have thought back to his childhood, the endless ceremonies, the suffocating protocols, the way he was always the spare, never the heir. Growing up in William's shadow, living in Diana's grief, feeling like his worth came not from who he was, but from what role he played in an institution that never truly saw him. Did he really want to step back into that world, even if it meant being welcomed again? But then there was another voice inside him, the voice of duty. The voice that told him he was born a prince, that his bloodline was not something he could just erase, that his children, Archie and Lilibet, still carried royal titles, however contested. Could he turn his back on the crown completely when his own father was inviting him, however conditionally, back into its embrace? And then came Meghan. Always Meghan. Harry thought about the woman who stood by him when the tabloids shredded his reputation. The woman who cradled him in California while he relived nightmares of his mother. The woman who gave him children, who gave him freedom, who gave him a new life far from the suffocating grip of Buckingham Palace. Could he really betray her? Could he look into her eyes and say, "I chose my father over you"? Here's the paradox. Harry wanted both. He wanted the love he had built with Meghan and the legacy he had left behind. But Charles's words made it clear. The two were no longer compatible. Now, let's ask the question directly. What would you do if you had to choose between your family of origin and the family you built? Between the father who raised you, imperfectly, yes, but still your father, and the partner who defines your present and future? This isn't just a royal question. It's a human one. But Harry's dilemma goes deeper than love and loyalty. It's about survival. Because he knows what happens to those who defy the monarchy. He saw it with Diana. He saw it with Edward VIII. The institution doesn't forgive easily. To refuse his father's offer could mean eternal exile. To accept it would mean tearing apart the life he fought so hard to protect. His mind must have swirled with contradictions. He remembered Diana telling him to follow his heart. He remembered his promise to Meghan to protect her, no matter the cost. He remembered Archie's small hands gripping his own, Lilibet's innocent smile. How could he ever look them in the eye if he chose a crown over their mother? And yet, there was still that flicker of doubt. That whisper, what if this is your last chance? What if the door closes forever? What if you regret it? Harry's dilemma wasn't a quick calculation. It was a storm of past pain, present love, and future uncertainty crashing together inside his chest. The silence between father and son stretched unbearably long. Charles's eyes were fixed on him, waiting. Harry's lips parted, but the words refused to come. Every choice felt like a betrayal. Every path led to heartbreak. But then, as he sat there torn apart, a memory surfaced. A memory of Diana. A memory of her voice, of her telling him once, long ago, "You must never let them break you." And with that, the storm inside him took a new shape. He wasn't just choosing between his father and his wife. He was choosing whether to repeat history or to break it. But what he remembered next about Diana's final warnings changed everything. Even though Diana had been gone for nearly 3 decades, her presence lingered in Clarence's house that night like a ghost watching silently from the corner. For Harry, every conversation with his father eventually came back to her. Every wound, every scar, every act of rebellion. It all traced back to Diana. And in that room, faced with Charles's ultimatum, Harry felt her legacy pressing down on him harder than ever before. Can you picture it? Harry sitting stiffly in his chair, his father across from him with the weight of the crown on his shoulders. Yet in Harry's mind, another figure sat between them, his mother, Diana, the woman who embodied love, warmth, and truth in a palace built on silence. Diana, the woman who shielded him and William from the coldness of royal duty. Diana, the woman who paid with her life for trying to escape the very machine his father was now asking him to rejoin. And here's the bitter irony. Charles's words, "not with her," echoed with the same cruelty Diana once endured. Diana, too, was told she didn't belong. Diana, too, was painted as the problem. Diana, too, was sacrificed on the altar of royal duty. Harry could almost hear her voice in his head, urging him not to let Meghan suffer the same fate. But let's dive deeper. Diana's legacy isn't just about her defiance. It's about her humanity. She showed Harry that compassion mattered more than protocol. She showed him that love should never be negotiated. Remember when she told her boys, "You can be as royal as you like, but you must also remember to be human"? That lesson burned inside Harry as his father tried to make his marriage a bargaining chip. Now, let's ask the raw question. Could Harry really betray Diana's memory by abandoning Meghan? Could he repeat the cycle, choosing crown over love, duty over heart? He knew the answer. He couldn't. He wouldn't. Because doing so would mean admitting that Diana's pain was for nothing, that her warnings were just whispers in the wind. And yet, here's where the twist comes. Charles had his own memory of Diana, a memory that made his ultimatum even more cutting. Charles still remembered the chaos of that marriage, the fights, the leaks, the humiliation splashed across tabloids every morning. In his mind, Diana wasn't just a saint. She was also a wound that never healed. And to him, Meghan looked like history repeating itself. Think about that for a second. To Harry, Diana's legacy was love. To Charles, it was danger. The same woman. Two completely different interpretations. And both of those ghosts were sitting in the room that night, shaping every word, every hesitation, every choice. Harry clenched his fists under the table. His mind drifted back to the funeral, to the endless walk behind his mother's coffin, the eyes of the world burning into him as he tried not to cry. He remembered promising himself he would never let his own children go through the same trauma, that he would protect them from the machine that had devoured Diana. And now, his father was asking him to bring Meghan and their children back into the fire. Could he really do that? Could he risk history repeating itself? Let me ask you directly. If your parent asked you to choose in a way that directly betrayed everything your late mother taught you, what would you do? Would you obey? Or would you defy, knowing you might lose your family forever? For Harry, Diana's voice wasn't just memory, it was conviction. Every warning she gave, every tear she shed, echoed in that room. To choose the monarchy over Meghan would be to silence Diana all over again. And Harry couldn't live with that. But Charles wasn't done. He had his own version of Diana's story, his own pain, his own fears. And what he revealed next about his memories of Diana, and how they shaped his view of Meghan, cut deeper than Harry ever expected. Because in Charles's eyes, Diana's ghost wasn't a guiding light. It was a haunting shadow, and he feared Meghan would become exactly the same. For King Charles, this was never just about Harry. It was about the image of the monarchy, the one thing that had to survive no matter the personal cost. Sitting in Clarence's house, staring across at his son, Charles wasn't only thinking as a father. He was thinking as a king whose every move was scrutinized, whose reign was constantly compared to the unshakable legacy of Queen Elizabeth. And in his mind, the monarchy was in crisis. The truth is, the British crown has always been less about power and more about perception. The monarchy lives or dies by public opinion, by the illusion of stability, by the belief that it is timeless, sacred, and untouchable. But in the 21st century, cracks have been showing. Scandal after scandal, Andrew's disgrace, Charles's own past controversies, Harry and Meghan's explosive accusations, have chipped away at the glossy surface. And Charles knows it. Every headline, every poll, every whisper in Parliament is a reminder that the monarchy is not invincible. Now, imagine being Charles in that moment. A man who waited his entire life to wear the crown, only to inherit it during a time when the institution feels more fragile than ever. His health is questioned. His relevance is doubted. And unlike his mother, who embodied stoic perfection, Charles has always been seen as flawed, messy, complicated. To him, every move must now serve one purpose: preserving the monarchy's image at all costs. And this is where Harry, and more importantly, Meghan, come in. Because to Charles, Meghan represents not just a daughter-in-law, but a threat to the monarchy's survival. Every time she speaks publicly, the palace loses control of the narrative. Every accusation she makes, whether about racism, neglect, or cruelty, chips away at the monarchy's carefully polished reputation. In Charles's mind, this isn't just family drama. This is an existential threat. Let's pause here. Ask yourself, do you see the contradiction? The monarchy demands loyalty and silence, yet Meghan thrives on independence and voice. The monarchy wants to project unity, yet Meghan symbolizes division. The monarchy thrives on tradition, yet Meghan embodies change. To Charles, it's not personal, it's political. She isn't just Meghan. She is the... But here's where it gets interesting. Charles also knows that Harry himself could be an asset. The prodigal son returning, the broken family healing, the crown proving it can adapt. These images would be powerful. They would reassure the public. They would restore faith. But only if Meghan was out of the picture. That's why Charles dangled the olive branch with one hand and held the dagger with the other. Now let's look at the numbers, because Charles certainly has. Public opinion polls in the UK show that Harry's popularity has plummeted since leaving royal life, but Meghan's has sunk even lower. For the monarchy strategists, the math is simple. Harry can still be salvaged. Meghan cannot. Bringing Harry back would be a win. Bringing Meghan back would be a disaster. And in Charles's world, perception is survival. This obsession with image isn't new. The monarchy has weathered crises before. Edward VIII's abdication, the backlash against Charles and Camilla, Diana's death. Each time, the institution adapted, but only by controlling the story, only by shaping how the public perceived it. Charles believes he's doing the same now. By framing Meghan as the problem and Harry as the solution, he can save both the family and the throne. At least, that's what he tells himself. But here's the cruel irony. By caring so much about image, Charles risks destroying the very relationships that could save him. Because Harry isn't a pawn in a strategy. He's a son. And Meghan isn't just an obstacle. She's Harry's wife, the mother of his children, the center of his new life. By reducing her to a public relations problem, Charles isn't just protecting the monarchy. He's alienating his son even further. Let me ask you directly. Do you think the monarchy can survive in the modern world by clinging to image and silencing truth? Or does survival now depend on honesty, transparency, even vulnerability? That's the question Charles refuses to face. And yet, as heavy as these struggles were, Charles knew he wasn't making these decisions alone. Another figure loomed large in his calculations, one whose opinion carried as much weight as the king's own. Because in every conversation about Harry's future, there was another shadow in the room, Prince William. And William's influence on this decision was about to make things even more complicated. He wasn't physically present at Clarence's house during that tense meeting between father and son, but his influence was everywhere. Harry could feel it in the way his father spoke, the measured words, the cautious promises. Charles might be king, but William is the heir. Every decision Charles makes now is shaped by the knowledge that he's only holding the crown in trust for his eldest son. And Harry knows it. He knows that even when he's face to face with his father, he's really negotiating with William's shadow. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Charles can't simply offer Harry a role back in the monarchy without considering how William feels about it. William isn't just a brother anymore. He's the future king. His approval, or disapproval, matters just as much as Charles's own will. And that complicates everything. Let's go back a few years to understand why. William and Harry weren't always like this. They were once inseparable, bonded by the trauma of losing their mother, united against the world. But as they grew older, duty carved a wedge between them. William leaned into his role as heir, taking on more responsibility, more seriousness, more caution. Harry leaned out, rebelling, laughing, refusing to be defined by titles. Their paths, once parallel, began to split. And when Meghan entered the picture, that split became a chasm. Remember the infamous line? William warning Harry not to rush into marriage with Meghan, to take it slow. Harry bristled, feeling judged, feeling dismissed. That moment planted a seed of bitterness that grew into the rift we see today. So when Charles tells Harry there could still be a place for him, Harry can't help but wonder, is this really his father's offer? Or is it William's condition, whispered into Charles's ear? Think about it. From William's perspective, bringing Harry back into the fold could be dangerous. How do you welcome a brother who wrote a tell-all memoir, who accused your wife of making Meghan cry, who painted your family as cold and cruel? William has built his image as the steady, dutiful, reliable heir. Harry's chaos threatens that image. And William knows one thing for certain. If Harry returns, Meghan must not. This is where the real tension lies. Because Charles, as king, might want to reconcile with his son. But William, as heir, has the power to veto. He's already shaping the monarchy he will inherit. And in William's vision, there is no room for Meghan Markle. Now, imagine being Harry in that room. Knowing your brother's disapproval hangs over everything. Knowing that even if your father offers you a role, it's meaningless unless William accepts you. The same brother who once held your hand behind your mother's coffin now stands as the greatest barrier between you and your royal future. The same bond that once defined you now defines your exile. But here's the twist. Charles is caught in the middle. He wants peace between his sons. He wants unity for the monarchy. But deep down, he fears William's resentment more than he fears losing Harry forever. Because William is the future. Harry is the past. And the king cannot risk alienating the heir. Let me ask you, do you think William would ever forgive Harry enough to share the stage with him again? Or is the brotherly bond so broken that no offer, no reconciliation, no olive branch could repair it? That night in Clarence's house, Harry didn't just hear his father's words. He heard William's silence, echoing louder than any voice. He realized that even if he agreed to Charles's condition, even if he somehow found a way to compromise, he would still face his brother's judgment. And just when Harry thought the night couldn't get any heavier, another storm was brewing. Because far away, Meghan herself was preparing her own countermove. And what she did next sent shockwaves all the way back to Clarence's house. Far from Clarence's house, across the ocean in Montecito, Meghan was watching events unfold in real time, not through direct access, but through whispers, calls, and the unrelenting hum of the media machine. Even though she wasn't in that gilded drawing room with Harry and Charles, her presence was undeniable. And Meghan, being Meghan, knew she couldn't stay silent forever. Here's the thing about Meghan. Love her or hate her, she has always understood the power of timing. She knows when to speak, when to hold back, and when to let silence become its own weapon. As Harry sat in Clarence's house weighing an ultimatum that threatened to dismantle his marriage, Meghan was already considering her countermove. Picture this. Harry leaves Clarence's house, still shaken by his father's words, and Meghan's first question is not just, "How was it?" but "What exactly did he say?" She knows Charles well enough to suspect there was no warm welcome without conditions. And when Harry tells her, when he reveals that Charles would only accept him back without her, you can imagine her reaction. Fury, hurt, vindication, all swirling together in a storm. Now let's be honest. Meghan has always been a polarizing figure. To her supporters, she's a woman who challenged an outdated institution, a modern feminist icon who refused to bow to tradition. To her critics, she's manipulative, divisive, a disruptor who turned a prince against his family. And she knows it. Every move she makes is magnified 100-fold by both camps. So when news of Charles's ultimatum began leaking, because let's face it, palace secrets never stay buried for long, Meghan had a decision to make. Would she fight back? Would she let her silence tell the story? Or would she craft her own narrative, carefully timed for maximum impact? And this is where Meghan's countermove came into play. Some reports suggested she began reaching out quietly to trusted journalists, letting the whispers spread. Others claimed she drafted a statement that never saw the light of day, a statement defending her marriage and calling out the cruelty of Charles's condition. Whether or not those drafts exist, the intention was clear. Meghan would not let herself be erased. Ask yourself this. Could Meghan ever accept the idea that Harry's place in the monarchy depends on her absence? Of course not. That's not who she is. She didn't marry Harry to play by the rules of a centuries-old institution. She married him because he was willing to break those rules. And now, to ask her to step aside for Harry's future is to demand she become the villain in her own love story. Meghan was never going to play that part quietly. So, she made her countermove, not through palace negotiations, but through perception. She let her allies remind the world that Harry had chosen her once before, when he walked away from the crown to stand by her side. She let her silence hang heavy, knowing the public would fill it with speculation. She knew exactly how to keep herself at the center of the story, even without saying a word. But here's the twist. Meghan's countermove didn't just defend her marriage. It fueled the fire. Because every whisper, every leak, every headline made Charles's ultimatum harder to walk back. The press latched on. Meghan or the monarchy? They painted it as the final showdown, the last battle between love and duty. And suddenly, what had been a private conversation in Clarence's house became an international spectacle. And let's not forget the emotional toll on Harry. Torn between his father's condition and his wife's resolve, he was caught in a tug-of-war that no man could endure for long. Every glance at Meghan reminded him of his promise to protect her. Every thought of his father reminded him of his duty to his family. And as the press circled like vultures, Harry realized that whatever choice he made, someone would be destroyed. Now I want to ask you directly. If you were Meghan, would you stay silent while your husband's family painted you as the problem? Or would you strike back, knowing the monarchy has centuries of power behind it? Meghan's choice was clear. She would not go quietly. And that choice lit the match that set the media storm ablaze. Because once Meghan made her counter-move, the press didn't just report. They roared. Headlines screamed betrayal. Insiders whispered about secret ultimatums. And the monarchy once again found itself at the center of a fire it couldn't control. But what came next wasn't just a media frenzy. It was a full-blown war of perception, one that would drag the monarchy into its most volatile storm yet. The whispers turned into murmurs. The murmurs became chatter. And before the sun had even risen on the following morning, the chatter had exploded into a full-blown media storm. Clarence's house had barely settled from the weight of Charles and Harry's private reunion before the world outside caught wind of the shocking ultimatum. Harry could return to the monarchy if he left Meghan behind. Headlines screamed across every front page. King draws line in the sand. Meghan the barrier to reconciliation. Harry's impossible choice. The tabloids went into overdrive, dissecting every detail, every whisper, every facial expression Harry had worn when leaving Clarence's house. Television pundits debated furiously. Was Charles wise to protect the crown from Meghan's influence, or cruel to pit a husband against his wife? Social media ignited. Hashtags flying at lightning speed. Hashtag stand with Harry. Hashtag team Meghan. Hashtag not without her. The irony was brutal. What Charles had intended as a private condition, a carefully measured demand spoken behind closed doors, had become a public spectacle overnight. And once the media machine roared to life, there was no stopping it. Harry and Meghan's names trended across the globe, not as individuals, but as pawns in a public chess match between love and monarchy. But here's where the storm grew even darker. The press didn't just report the facts, they twisted them. They speculated. They sensationalized. Some headlines claimed Charles had begged Harry to return, framing the king as a father desperate for peace. Others painted Charles as cold, ruthless, and heartless, willing to sacrifice his son's happiness for the crown. And then there were those who turned their fire on Meghan, calling her manipulative, divisive, the reason Harry was trapped in exile. Do you see what's happening here? The media wasn't just covering the story. They were fueling it, shaping it, weaponizing it. And for Harry and Meghan, the storm was no longer about one private conversation. It was about survival in a battle of perception. Imagine Meghan in Montecito, watching the headlines scroll across her phone. Every cruel word about her. Every insinuation that she was the villain. Every reminder that in the eyes of the British press, she would never be accepted. How do you think she felt? Vindicated? Outraged? Heartbroken? Perhaps all three at once. But one thing was certain. She would not let the press write her story for her. Meanwhile, Harry was drowning. He had walked into Clarence's house hoping for reconciliation, a spark of love from his father. Instead, he had walked out into a firestorm that painted his marriage as the obstacle to his identity. He saw the cameras waiting outside, the paparazzi lenses trained on him, desperate to capture the flicker of pain in his eyes. And as the headlines grew more vicious by the hour, Harry realized something chilling. The same machine that had hounded Diana to her death was now circling him and Meghan, hungrier than ever. But here's the twist. Amid the chaos, one journalist claimed to have leaked details that went beyond the simple ultimatum. Not only had Charles demanded Harry leave Meghan, he had allegedly tied the offer to succession itself. The report suggested that Charles hinted at a future role for Harry in the monarchy only if he restored dignity to the crown. The phrase was vague, but it set the press ablaze. Did Charles mean cutting ties with Meghan was the only way Harry could ever be trusted near the throne again? Let me ask you, do you think the monarchy, with its centuries of scandal, can really talk about restoring dignity? Or was this just another attempt to shift blame away from its own failings and onto Meghan's shoulders? The storm didn't stop there. Politicians chimed in, with some MPs calling Charles's alleged condition archaic and heartless, while others praised him for defending the institution. Celebrities tweeted in support of Harry and Meghan, sparking even more debate. The story was everywhere, impossible to ignore. And through it all, Clarence's house remained silent. No denial, no clarification, just silence. And in the royal world, silence is never neutral. Silence is strategy. But here's the kicker. While the world was busy arguing over Meghan, Charles, and Harry, one journalist uncovered something buried deeper. Something darker. A leak that suggested this wasn't just about a father and son at odds. This was about the very survival of the monarchy, and a plan being whispered behind closed doors that could change everything. Because if Harry refused the king's condition, Charles had another move waiting. And that move was about to shock even the most hardened royal watchers. History has a way of circling back, especially within the walls of Buckingham and Clarence's house. What Harry was living through that night wasn't new. It was a repeat, a haunting echo of crises past. And if you look closely, you'll see the threads of history woven through Charles's ultimatum like a tapestry of irony and pain. Because this wasn't just Harry's dilemma, it was the Windsor curse resurfacing once again. Let's rewind almost a century to 1936. King Edward VIII, Harry's great-granduncle, stood before a similar impossible choice. He was deeply in love with Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. Sound familiar already? The crown told him he couldn't marry her and keep the throne. Edward chose love. He abdicated. And with that choice, the monarchy was nearly shaken to its core. Britain got a new king, George VI, Elizabeth's father. The crown survived, but Edward was exiled, reduced to a footnote, remembered not as a king, but as the man who gave it all up for a woman. Do you see the eerie parallel? Harry, too, is in love with an American woman. Meghan, like Wallis, is painted as the manipulative outsider, the woman the monarchy won't accept. And once again, the family has drawn a line. The throne or the love. Not both. But the story doesn't stop with Edward. Think about Charles himself. For decades, his love for Camilla was treated as poison. The monarchy forced him into a marriage with Diana, a marriage that crumbled under the weight of lies, betrayals, and press hysteria. Camilla was the problem then, the woman who didn't fit the fairy tale mold. And yet, here we are, years later, with Camilla as queen consort. Charles fought, suffered, and eventually won his battle. But now, instead of showing empathy, he's turning the same cruelty on his son. The cycle repeats. And then, of course, there's Diana. The ultimate tragic parallel. She, too, was painted as the threat, the woman who destabilized the monarchy, the one whose very humanity made the crown look brittle and cold. She was adored by the people but rejected by the institution. She exposed the monarchy's flaws, just as Meghan does now. And she paid with her life for the pressure, the scrutiny, the merciless tabloid storm. Harry cannot escape these parallels. They haunt him. He sees in Meghan the same attacks that destroyed his mother. He sees in his father's condition the same kind of suffocating control that once tore apart Charles and Diana. And he sees in his great-granduncle Edward's abdication the possibility of his own legacy, being remembered not as a prince, but as the man who chose love over duty and never looked back. Now let's ask the real question. Is history repeating itself because the monarchy refuses to change? Or is it simply doomed to recycle the same tragedies, generation after generation, until someone finally breaks the cycle? For Charles, history is both a warning and a justification. He looks at Edward VIII and sees the danger of letting love outweigh duty. He looks at Diana and sees the danger of a woman who challenged the institution. He looks at his own past with Camilla and convinces himself that sacrifice and patience are the only way forward. To him, Harry's rebellion isn't new. It's just another chapter in the same old royal drama. But here's the twist. Harry doesn't see it that way. For him, history is a guide, not a prison. He doesn't want to become another Edward VIII, exiled and forgotten. He doesn't want Meghan to become another Diana, destroyed by the machine. And he doesn't want to live his father's life, hiding his true self for the sake of appearances. Harry wants to break the cycle. The question is, can he? Or is the pull of history too strong? As the media storm swirled, commentators couldn't help but draw the parallels. Headlines screamed, "Is Harry the new Edward VIII? Will Meghan suffer Diana's fate?" Charles repeats his own mistakes. Every article reminded the world that the House of Windsor doesn't change. It just recycles the same heartbreak. And as Harry sat alone that night, the weight of history pressed down like a lead blanket. He knew his next move would not just define his life. It would determine whether history repeated itself once more, or whether he would be the first wins. What if the King of England sat his own son down in a private room and told him, without hesitation, that the one thing standing between him and his royal destiny was not his behavior, not his scandals, not even his exit from the family, but his wife? Imagine the weight of that. Imagine the shock in Harry's chest as those words rolled out. That is where this story begins. And I have to warn you, what you're about to hear isn't the polite, carefully polished fairy tale version of royal life. This is raw, messy, and dripping with the kind of betrayal that can tear a family apart forever. Now, let me pull you into that moment. Clarence House, a place steeped in history, echoing with footsteps of monarchs and ghosts of decisions past. Harry, the estranged son, walking through those grand doors he once called home. Can you picture it? The hesitation in his step. The reporters swarming outside like vultures, desperate for any glimpse of reconciliation. Yet inside, away from cameras, there's silence. A silence that weighs heavier than the chandeliers hanging above. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Why does this meeting matter now? Because for months, years even, the narrative has been controlled by whispers. That Harry is lost. That Charles is distant. That Meghan is pulling strings. But here, in this room, father and son are face to face, stripped of palace press releases and spin doctors. And finally, Charles lets something slip, something that flips the entire script on its head. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To understand the magnitude of that moment, we need to rewind. Think about the state of the monarchy right now. King Charles, only a short time into his reign, already juggling scandals, health rumors, and the never-ending comparison to his mother's near-perfect legacy. He cannot afford cracks in the royal facade. And yet, the biggest crack is his own son, the one who turned his back on royal life, fled across the ocean, and began airing the family's dirty laundry for the world to see. Now, here's the question. Did Charles invite Harry back out of love, out of strategy, or out of desperation? Because let's be real, every move in that palace has layers. Every word is calculated. And yet, when Charles finally opened his mouth, what came out wasn't polished. It was personal, painfully personal. Picture Harry sitting across from his father. The king looks at him not as a monarch, but as a father who has watched his son spiral further and further away. His voice low, almost trembling. "Harry, you still have a place here. You could still have a role." Can you imagine the flicker of hope in Harry's eyes? For a moment, the boy who once followed his mother's coffin through London streets hears his father extending a lifeline, a chance to belong again, a chance to matter within the very institution he abandoned. But then, the sting, the catch. Charles adds, almost under his breath, "but not with her." The room falls silent again, thicker this time, suffocating. Because in that single phrase, Charles did more than just extend an olive branch. He ripped open the deepest wound in Harry's adult life. His marriage, his loyalty, his identity. Why does this strike such a chord? Because Charles himself once fought against a similar royal machine for the love of his life, Camilla. He knows what it feels like to be told she's not good enough for the crown. He knows the agony of being forced to choose between duty and desire. So why would he turn around and put his son in the exact same position? Hypocrisy? Projection? Or does he truly believe Meghan is the fatal flaw in Harry's story? Let's pause here. I want to ask you directly. If you were Harry, what would you do? Would you consider the offer? Reclaim your birthright, but at the cost of your wife? Or would you walk away, holding on to love, even if it meant permanent exile? Think about that. That's not just a royal dilemma. That's a human one. And this is why the story matters. Because beyond the palaces and tiaras, this is about the eternal clash between family loyalty, romantic love, and the weight of legacy. Harry is not just a son. He's a symbol A living reminder that even in gilded cages, choices cut deep. Now, here's where things twist further. Outside the palace walls, the public perception is shifting. For years, the narrative painted Harry as the rebel, Meghan as the manipulator, Charles as the cold monarch. But this reunion hints at something far more complex. Charles, for all his kingly power, admits his son has a future. He doesn't close the door. He opens it, but only halfway. Only if Meghan is left behind. What does that tell us? It tells us Charles hasn't given up on Harry. That beneath the crown, he still aches for his son. But it also tells us he sees Meghan not as a partner, but as a barrier, a wedge, the problem. And in royal history, wedges like that rarely survive. Do you see the parallels? Edward VIII gave up his throne for Wallis Simpson. Charles nearly lost his own reputation for Camilla. And now, Harry faces the same fork in the road. History is repeating itself before our very eyes. But here's the twist. This time, it's the father urging the son to abandon love for the sake of the throne. And so, the cliffhanger builds. Because as Harry sat there, reeling from his father's words, the world outside had no clue. Cameras were waiting for a smile, a handshake, a sign of unity. But inside Clarence House, a new ultimatum had been born, a choice that would reverberate through generations. But what came next? Well, let's just say no one saw it coming. When Harry walked through the gates of Clarence House, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Imagine that moment. A prince who once belonged to every brick of this house, returning not as a son of the monarchy, but as an outsider, estranged, controversial, even resented by some. The cameras outside clicked furiously, flashes of light reflecting off the windows, but no one could capture what was really happening inside. This wasn't just a reunion. This was a test. Think about it. Clarence House has seen decades of royal history, but that day, the walls carried the weight of whispers louder than any state secret. Was this the beginning of reconciliation? Or the final curtain call on a broken relationship between father and son? Harry's steps echoed down the hallways, polished floors shining as if mocking his discomfort. He paused, just for a second, in front of the portraits that lined the walls. Can you imagine what was running through his mind? His grandmother's calm gaze staring down at him, his father's younger face captured in a moment of duty, and his late mother, Diana, immortalized in photographs he could never walk past without his heart tightening. Every portrait a reminder of the family he both belonged to and rejected. Inside the drawing room, Charles sat waiting, not with the stiff, commanding posture of a king at court, but with the hunched shoulders of a father weathered by years of battles, public and private. He didn't rise immediately. He didn't open his arms. He simply looked at Harry, as though measuring the weight of what was about to happen. Do you feel the tension? This wasn't the kind of father-son reunion where hugs were exchanged and forgiveness poured out easily. No, this was a collision of two worlds. The King of England versus the rebel son who abandoned the monarchy for love. And now, they were face to face in the very house that symbolized royal duty. Harry spoke first. His voice was steady, but beneath it, there was a current of hesitation. It's been a long time, Pa. The old nickname, still there, fragile but present. Charles nodded, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. Pride? Pain? Or perhaps the cold calculation of a man who knows that even family moments can shift the course of history. Let's pause and ask, what did Harry hope to achieve in this meeting? Did he expect an apology? A welcome back into the fold? Or did he walk embracing for yet another rejection? Remember, this is a man who has publicly accused his own family of neglect, of cruelty, even of complicity in his pain. Could he really believe this would be different? The silence stretched before Charles finally spoke. His words were formal, yet laced with something personal. Harry, it's good to see you. Just 6 words, but the weight behind them was enormous. For a father and son who had barely shared a room in years, it was a start. But notice, Charles didn't say, I missed you. He didn't say, I'm proud of you. He said, it's good to see you. Safe, neutral, a royal kind of love, distant and carefully measured. As the minutes ticked by, small talk gave way to sharper words. They discussed family. They discussed duty. They even touched, carefully, on Meghan and the children. But the room grew heavier with every passing second. Because both men knew the real reason they were here wasn't to catch up. It was to decide the future. Here's where it gets fascinating. At one point, Charles leaned back in his chair, studying Harry as though he were a soldier under inspection. "You've made your choices," he said, "and choices come with consequences. Do you hear the sting in that?" It wasn't just fatherly advice. It was a monarch's judgment. Yet, at the same time, there was an opening. Consequences, yes, but not finality. Not yet. Harry's response was sharp, his tone almost defensive. "I've done what I needed to for my family." Family. That word again. For Harry, family means Meghan and the children. For Charles, family means crown, duty, and lineage. Same word, two entirely different definitions. Can you see the tragedy in that? But then, Charles shifted the tone. His voice softened, just slightly. "Harry, there could be a role for you still. A place within the monarchy." For a split second, Harry's face betrayed him. Surprise. Maybe even hope. The prodigal son, hearing that perhaps the door wasn't fully closed after all. But let me ask you, how would you react if your father dangled your identity, your place in history, in front of you like bait? Would you reach for it? Or would you wonder what trap was hidden behind the offer? And here lies the heart of this chapter. Because while Harry sat in Clarence's house, hearing words he never thought he'd hear again, he didn't know yet that Charles wasn't finished. That this supposed olive branch came with thorns sharper than he ever imagined. The air grew tense again. The words hung unsaid, until Charles leaned forward, his eyes heavy, and spoke the line that would change everything. But what he said next, no one in that room, not even Harry, was prepared for. What does it really mean to be king? We imagine crowns, palaces, and parades, but rarely do we picture the crushing loneliness that comes with it. Behind the velvet curtains of Buckingham and Clarence's house, Charles has carried doubts and burdens that would make most men collapse. And as Harry sat across from him, listening to his father's words, he wasn't just looking at the King of England. He was looking at a man who had been torn apart by his own private struggles, long before Harry ever left the royal fold. Let's dig into those struggles, because they explain why Charles said what he did at Clarence's house, why he views Meghan not as a daughter-in-law, but as an obstacle, and why he clings so desperately to the fragile idea of duty. First, imagine being raised not to be loved, but to be trained. Charles grew up in a palace where affection was rare and discipline was constant. His parents, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, weren't unkind so much as they were dutiful. The crown always came first. For Charles, that meant childhood felt more like preparation for war than a time of play. While other boys his age were chasing footballs in fields, Charles was being drilled in the expectations of kingship. Do you think a childhood like that leaves scars? It does. And those scars have shaped every decision Charles has ever made. His infamous marriage to Diana, his decades-long love for Camilla, hidden and shamed, his awkwardness in public, his stiffness that the press mocked mercilessly. Every stumble, every hesitation, magnified because he wasn't just a man. He was the heir, always compared to his mother's unshakable composure, always falling short, always too sensitive, too fragile, too human. And now, finally king, Charles faces a new storm, his son Harry, the son who reminds him so painfully of both Diana's fire and his own vulnerabilities. The son who inherited the rebellious streak Charles never dared to fully embrace. The son who left. But why? You ask, does Charles fixate so much on Meghan? Why does he see her as the wedge, the problem, the block to Harry's return? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Charles has been here before. Decades ago, it was Camilla who was the problem, the woman the crown wouldn't accept. The difference? Charles stayed. He bent under the pressure. He waited until the timing was right, until his mother relented, until Camilla could be woven, carefully, painfully, into the fabric of the monarchy. He paid for his love with decades of public humiliation and restraint. And in his mind, Harry has refused to pay the same price. Can you see the irony? Charles, who once fought the monarchy for love, now tells his son to abandon love for the monarchy. A contradiction so sharp it borders on cruelty. But in Charles's private struggles, it makes sense. Because Charles is a man defined by sacrifice. Sacrifice of freedom, sacrifice of authenticity, sacrifice of happiness for the crown. And he expects Harry to do the same. Now let's shift to another layer of Charles's struggle, public perception. Since Diana's death, Charles has lived in the shadow of her sainthood. No matter what he does, He will always be the man who made Diana cry, the man who failed her, the man whose own choices cast a long shadow over his reign. When Harry and Meghan entered the stage, Diana's ghost came roaring back. Meghan, glamorized as the outsider bride, the woman challenging royal traditions, was seen by some as a Diana 2.0. For Charles, that comparison wasn't flattering. It was threatening, because once again, he saw himself losing the narrative. Let's ask the difficult question. Is Charles's problem truly Meghan, or is it the way Meghan revives the ghost of Diana, the one woman Charles could never control? Maybe Meghan isn't the threat herself. Maybe it's what she symbolizes: independence, rebellion, and the power to make the monarchy look heartless. That's the wound Charles never healed. And yet, despite all of this, Charles's private battle isn't just about the past. It's about the future. The monarchy, fragile as it is, cannot withstand too many fractures. Charles knows his reign is temporary, a bridge to William's era. He knows history will judge him not by his policies, but by whether the House of Windsor survives intact. And in that calculation, Harry is both an asset and a liability. Bring him back, and you restore unity. Keep Meghan, and you risk further division. This is the crossroads Charles finds himself at. A father longing for his son. A king desperate to protect the institution. A man haunted by ghosts. His voice may have sounded cold, but beneath it lay decades of private torment. So when he looked Harry in the eyes and offered a conditional olive branch, it wasn't just about Harry's future. It was about Charles's survival, his reign, his legacy, his peace of mind. And yet, as heavy as those words were, Charles still hadn't revealed the most controversial part of his truth. Because what he whispered next didn't just expose his private struggles. It pushed Harry toward a choice no son should ever have to face. But that, my friends, is where the real storm begins. Even when Meghan wasn't physically present at Clarence's house, her presence filled the room like smoke that no one could clear. She wasn't in the chair beside Harry. She wasn't standing in the corner, arms crossed, ready to defend herself. But she was there, in every glance, every pause, every unspoken word between father and son. Because let's be honest, Meghan Markle has become the unavoidable ghost in every royal conversation. Think about it. For Charles, Meghan isn't just Harry's wife. She represents a shift he doesn't understand, a rebellion against traditions he spent his entire life protecting. For Harry, Meghan is his anchor, the one who pulled him out of a life he found suffocating. So when Charles looked at his son across that ornate room, it was impossible to separate Harry from Meghan. In Charles's eyes, the two were fused together, and that was the problem. Now, picture the moment. Charles takes a measured breath, his fingers clasped tightly in his lap. He wants to talk about Harry, but every word circles back to Meghan. She has changed you, he says quietly, not as a compliment, but as an accusation. Harry stiffens. His jaw clenches. He knows what's coming. This is the part where we have to ask, why does Meghan cast such a long shadow? It's not just about the interviews, the Netflix specials, or the memoir. It's deeper. For Charles, Meghan's very existence is a challenge. She doesn't bow to the unspoken rules. She doesn't keep quiet. She doesn't respect the invisible boundaries that every royal, including Diana, eventually collided with. To Charles, Meghan isn't simply outspoken. She is dangerous, because she reminds the world that the monarchy is fragile, flawed, and fallible. And here's the twist. Meghan's shadow doesn't only haunt Charles. It looms over Harry, too. Because as much as Harry loves her, he knows that every royal conversation now starts with Meghan's name. Every attempt at reconciliation gets tangled in her reputation. Every door that could open for him is slammed shut because she's standing beside him. How does a man choose between the love of his life and the family he was born into? That's not just a royal dilemma. That's universal heartbreak. But let's dig deeper into Charles's mind. Why does he blame Meghan so much? The truth is, it's easier. Easier to say Meghan poisoned Harry than to admit that the family itself pushed him away. Easier to paint her as the villain than to face the truth of decades of dysfunction. Do you see the pattern? By placing the blame on Meghan, Charles avoids the mirror. He avoids the uncomfortable possibility that maybe Harry didn't leave because of her, but because of them. Yet the shadow grows darker when you consider the public. Outside Clarence's house, Meghan is not just a duchess, she's a symbol. For some, She is the modern Cinderella who broke free from a toxic family. For others, she's the scheming outsider who manipulated a prince. Every headline, every tweet, every whispered conversation has painted her in extremes. Angel or demon, savior or destroyer. There is no in-between.